Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Cannon Fodder, originally released on Amiga and later ported to a lot of different systems, but what you're seeing here is the DOS version. This is an action tactics game, I guess is the best way to describe it, developed by Sensible Software and published by Virgin Interactive back in 1993, originally for Amiga, and like I said, what you're seeing here is the DOS version that came out later on. And like I said before, it was ported to a wide variety of systems, including the Atari Jaguar, the Sega Genesis, and SNES, and even the 3DO. And it was extremely well received in its day, although the sort of dark humor that it employs was a bit hit or miss with some people. But then again, it's dark humor. It's gonna be hit or miss with just about everybody. But what I'm more concerned with is how it actually functions as a game, because it's an interesting mix-up of strategy or tactics and shoot-'em-up elements. It seems like an odd combination, but if you've played something like Syndicate, then you know it can work. I am, of course, talking about the original Syndicate and Syndicate Wars, not the 2012 reboot, which was an FPS. And to give you some context for my experience with this game, I did actually play a sort of demo version of the game back in the day, and I'm going back to it and playing the full release now. Thing is, I was never really attached to this game back in the day, because honestly, I could never really get it working all that well. So even though I did have a grasp of the mechanics, I did go into this thing mostly blind. And with all that in mind, how well does this thing hold up almost 24 years after its original release? Let's go ahead and delve into this thing and find out. Well, the presentation certainly holds up pretty well. It is 2D from a sort of isometric perspective, and it's got some pretty charming visuals. A lot of that is due to the rather exaggerated, cartoony look that the graphics have, and the fact that it's colorful and surprisingly well detailed really does help things out quite a bit. Although it is occasionally annoying when enemies blend in with the environments, but you would kind of hope they would do that if they're wearing camouflage, right? And when you move into things that aren't the main game visuals, you have an interface that is pretty clean and easy to work with, although it does require some fiddling to really get it down. Trying to separate your men into different squads and getting everything to go exactly as you want it to can be a bit frustrating at first, but once you get used to it, it's relatively intuitive. Although it does have a few interesting implications for the gameplay, so I'll cover that more in a moment. But going back to the presentation, once you get past the visuals, which have held up pretty well, you get to sound design, which has held up slightly less well. Explosions sound pretty weak, the gunfire doesn't really sound all that great, the music is actually more annoying than anything else, and the yelling that the characters do when you blast them to bits is really kind of annoying as well. So while the visuals still hold up pretty well, the sound design just doesn't. But of course what really matter in a video game are the story and the gameplay, except this game does not have a story. You basically just command a squad of soldiers around and blast the living crap out of anything that gets in your way. Beyond that, there really isn't a story. It all falls to the gameplay, which is an interesting sort of tactical shooter. The game takes place in an isometric perspective, and you control your characters around with only the mouse. So if you left click, then the characters start moving in that direction, and if you right click, then that engages your weaponry. Now if you just right click, then that means you start shooting, and you have infinite rounds of ammunition with just your basic guns, but you do have limited amounts of ammunition of grenades and rockets. And you can swap between grenades and rockets by clicking on the image of grenades or rockets in the interface to the left of the screen. You also use this interface to divide up your characters into various squads. So you can select the various characters that you want to separate, and you just click the image above the whole squad there, and it will split them off into a new squad. It will also divvy up the ammunition for the grenades and rockets between the two squads if you so desire. You can have up to a total of 3 squads, and you can switch between them by simply clicking the unit banner right above that particular squad. And you can of course recombine the squads by selecting the characters and then selecting the squads that you want them to join back into. It may be simple, but it actually works rather well as far as divvying up your squad goes. And if you do feel the need to break up into smaller squads, then that option is certainly available to you. This comes with a couple of problems, however. The amount of soldiers you're given depends entirely on the mission. Some of them will give you only a couple of them, some will give you a larger number. It's up to 6 in total, and most of them are somewhere between 3 and 5. Doesn't sound like a lot, right? It's not. You actually have to be very careful with how you divvy up your squads and be very careful with how you move around and what you're shooting at and what's actually shooting back at you. This is in no small part due to the fact that all of your characters die in one hit. So it's not remotely uncommon for an enemy to one-shot your entire squad simply by tossing a grenade at them. Which, given the pixel art, is actually pretty easy not to notice if the bullets are flying as well. This means you have to be especially careful even when early on in the game you're going up against enemies who also die on one hit, so they're actually pretty easy to deal with. But honestly, it's not really the enemies you have to worry about so much as the random crap that always insta-gibs your squad when you're least expecting it. Let's say you're moving your guys around and you happen across some terrain you've never run into before. You're like, oh, what's that? And you step into it, and your guys instantly die because it's quicksand. Sure, you'll probably only make that mistake once, but it is still pretty annoying. What's considerably more annoying is the game's penchant for BS, which gets worse and worse the more you get into the game. You see, it starts out with something fairly simple, like when you destroy a building and a piece of debris from that building either wipes out your entire squad or wipes out at least some of your squad. Because the vectors for those are pretty random, it ends up being pretty irritating to try to dodge them. So the only halfway safe way of destroying the buildings in this game is to hang back and toss grenades at them from a distance. That way you have some leeway when inevitably things go south. But then there's the things that you kinda can't work around. Like levels where they throw a crap ton of bazooka troopers at you. Bazooka troopers being able to hit you almost instantly from really far away with a bazooka that will instantly wipe out half of your squad. And that's if you're lucky. You just kind of have to run around and hope that you actually are able to dodge all of the projectiles coming your way, and you're probably not going to be able to dodge all of them. Especially when you have your entire squad moving around and slowing things down a bit. So what I found was the best strategy was to just split up my squad so I would only have one guy active at a time, and I would just send that one guy running around the entire level, mowing down every enemy in his path and blasting the living crap out of whatever needed to be blasted the living crap out of. Theoretically, I could have used the other squad members to set up ambushes or to split up and attack multiple objectives, but you can only control one squad at a time. The other squads just sit there and do nothing. If an enemy wanders into range, they'll start shooting at it, and they'll probably end up throwing grenades or launching rockets at it, which is extremely annoying because those are in very short supply, particularly once you get later on in the game, and end up having to take out multiple objectives and often barely have enough ammunition for those to be able to do so. Because there are certain things in the game, for example buildings, that will only go down if you hit them with those grenades or rockets. So obviously you want to save them for when you really need them, and the AI isn't really good enough to be able to conserve them. It'll just end up wasting half of your ammunition, and you'll just sit there going, well, crap, now I can't finish the mission. I guess I gotta restart it again. So I mostly stuck to the single-man squads, and that ended up working out surprisingly well. It's just a lot easier to maneuver when you don't have this trail of dumb characters following your one lead character around. Sure, your firepower is somewhat reduced, but that's something you can pretty easily work around since most enemies die in basically one hit anyway. So to compensate for that, they throw a lot of them at you at once, and if there are buildings on the map, then they will just continually spawn enemies. And when you get further into the game, you start finding that the terrain ends up messing with you, where you'll have the quicksand pits, or you'll have ice that allows your soldiers to just kind of slide around and generally gets in your way all the time. Or they'll toss in booby traps like landmines that will just wreak havoc on your squad if you manage to stumble over them. Or they'll start railroading you into certain locations, or they'll force you to go through water, which slows you down to a crawl and leaves you completely defenseless. And that's all on top of the enemies and enemy structures that it throws at you to deal with. And when you bring it all together, what you have is something that becomes incredibly frustrating to deal with, particularly considering the save system in this game. You can only save your game between the missions. So let's say you finish mission 1, then mission 2 is about to start, it goes to the boot hill screen where you show how many recruits you have and all of the recruits that have already died and all the recruits that are currently in your squad. You can save your game on that screen, but once you get into the mission, if it's a multi-phase mission, then every single phase has to be finished before you can actually save again. Now, it's not completely insane. It doesn't make you go through the entirety of the mission over again if you manage to lose your squad or you have to restart the level for some particular reason. It just restarts whatever phase you're on, but even then, that's still irritating to deal with. Because while the game isn't particularly long, with certain phases it feels like it's a lot longer than it really is, simply because it becomes so frustrating to deal with. You can only take being blasted to hell by bazooka troopers so many times before you finally just say, screw this. And the worst part is, if you try to load your game, then it's just going to start you back at the very beginning of that mission. So you have more incentive to just keep trying it until you either run out of recruits or you manage to actually succeed at all of the phases of that mission. And when you really get down to it, this game is up to two things. It's not up to your strategy or your tactics, because the strategic element in this game is absolutely minimal to the point where it's practically non-existent. What it's really up to are chance, the hope that you just get lucky with the way you're dodging projectiles or dodging debris from destroyed buildings and things like that, and your reflexes. How quickly you can move that mouse around to be able to shoot at various enemies before you accidentally fall into a pit or fall into a bit of water or something along those lines, or just get blasted to hell. And it's not even really up to trial and error. Sure, you can try different approaches, but that's not really going to help you that much. Ultimately, it just falls down to, could you hit the enemy before they hit you? And thus, calling it a tactics or strategy game is really a misnomer. This is a shoot-'em-up game. It just has a few tactical elements that are pretty half-baked. And even the shooting elements really aren't all that great either, because you don't really feel like you have full control over your characters so much as you're just fighting the mechanics at every turn. And when you look back on it today, it really does not hold up very well at all. And it certainly doesn't live up to its advertising slogan, which is, "War has never been so much fun." Maybe on Amiga back in '93 this was impressive, but going back to it, particularly the DOS version, which actually runs faster than the Amiga version, so that might have something to do with it, hindsight just reveals that despite it having quite a lot of content, which is basically 72 levels in total, it's 23 missions and many of them have several phases. And even though the control scheme is relatively intuitive, despite the issues you'll have with unit pathfinding, I mean, you've been seeing it throughout this video, where soldiers will just get stuck on terrain all the time, which gets pretty irritating when you're trying to maneuver quickly. And even though the game just exudes a ton of charm with its dark sense of humor and its clear satire of war and trying to convey this sort of anti-war message, it's just not a very good game. It relies way too heavily on mechanical BS in order to actually make the game difficult, and that just makes the game frustrating instead of enjoyable. Because like I said before, you can only take so many off-screen rockets to the face before you just finally say screw this and quit the game. And I cannot remotely recommend Cannon Fodder as anything other than a historical curiosity at this point as a result. I will still have a link in the video description box where you can pick this up on GOG if you're interested, but like I said, I don't recommend it. It's more frustrating than anything else. Certainly unique, certainly different, certainly an interesting take on satire of anti-war within a video game context, but ultimately just not a very fun game. Thanks for watching.